Some months ago, we published Biographics on Italian World War II Navy Commander Junio Valerio Borghese. Many have asked us to cover some more military protagonists from the Italian side of the Axis alliance, as they tend to get less attention than their German counterparts. And in the video today, we're going to do someone who we think might satisfy your curiosity. Today's protagonist was an Olympics-level horse rider, a ladies' man, a cavalry officer of 3 wars, a guerrilla fighter, and a secret agent. This is the story of how Baron Amedeo Guillet became the Devil Commander who waged a private war against the British Empire in East Africa. Baron Amedeo Guillet was born on February 7, 1909 in Piacenza, northern Italy, to an aristocratic family. Following in the footsteps of his family's tradition, Amedeo enlisted in the military academy, graduating in 1931 as a second lieutenant in the cavalry. Assigned to a light horseman regiment, he impressed his superiors with his horse-riding skills, so much so that he joined the Italian horse-riding team for the upcoming Berlin Olympics of 1936. As a young and dashing officer with a perfect moustache, Amedeo quickly became renowned for other successes. The ladies could not resist him, and he was rumored to have dated Hollywood actress Mary Pickford, among other celebrities. But Olympic training and romantic affairs would soon give way to another calling. In the summer of 1935, Guillet was ordered to the Italian colony of Libya to train a squadron of SPE, local mounted troops. Guillet would soon realize that these riders, whom he described as splendid, needed little training. In fact, he actually had a lot to learn from them. It is not clear whether Guillet knew that he was going to lead the SPEs into battle very soon. The war with Abyssinia was just around the corner. What he did realize, though, is that to properly lead them and earn their respect, he had to speak their language. Guillet decided to learn Arabic by joining a local Quranic school alongside children less than half his age. As it turned out, Guillet had a talent for learning languages, and very soon he was able to communicate with his soldiers. He would perfect his Arabic in the following years, an ability that would eventually prove very handy. In October 1935, Mussolini ordered the invasion of Abyssinia, following a border incident with Eritrea, an Italian colony. Emperor Haile Selassie denounced the act of aggression to the League of Nations, but it resulted in little action or support from the Western powers, save for an ineffectual trade embargo against Italy. With the start of the war, Guillet could have asked for a relocation to the motherland thanks to his scintillating credentials, but he asked instead to be assigned to the front. After 2 months of little action, it was time for Guillet and his SPEs to engage the enemy at the Battle of Selakla on Christmas Eve 1935. At that time, he was suffering from a bad bout of malaria. Indeed, he was so drowsy and feverish that he had to rely on his spy sergeant to spot incoming enemies on his behalf. This is how he took notice of an incoming Ethiopian rifleman who he shot with his pistol, his first kill in combat. The battle soon turned into a melee, and another Ethiopian tried to tackle him off his horse. Guillet struck him on the head with the hilt of his sword, knocking him out cold. Immediately afterward, a bullet came flying towards his stomach, but fortunately for him, it hit the pommel of his saddle and ricocheted through his left hand. As the war dragged into 1936, Guillet was able to experience firsthand the horrors and inequalities of modern colonial warfare. Official historical sources still differ on whether the Italian Air Force dropped poison gas canisters on Haile Selassie's troops or not, but we do have Guillet's personal and eyewitness account. He did witness at least one such aerial gas attack during the campaign. Not only did he find it a dishonorable and inhumane way to conduct an offensive, but he also observed that in most cases it was ineffectual against an unentrenched, highly mobile enemy such as the Ethiopians. Guillet found his own way of fighting to be the most honorable and effective, and that was a horse, a sword, and a pistol. When on May 5, 1936, the Italians conquered the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa, Guillet was not there to celebrate. He had been ordered back to Tripoli for a delicate assignment. The Duce was due to visit Tripoli, and the colonial authorities needed a skilled horse trainer for an elaborate propaganda stunt, the ceremony of the Sword of Islam. After reviewing Italian and colonial troops atop a splendid white horse, Mussolini would solemnly unsheath the scimitar for the benefit of newsreels. The ceremony's meaning was to portray Italians in Africa as natural allies of the Muslim populations against other colonial powers. The ceremony was a success, but Guillet's hand wound got infected and worsened over time, so he was sent to Naples to undergo surgery. After the operation, Guillet spent some time recovering with his relatives, the Gandolfos. Among them, his childhood best friend and favorite cousin was there, Beatrice. People at that time, they probably should have known better than to leave an aristocrat and a cousin alone in the same room. It very often led to much beseeching, swooning, hand-kissing, and other euphemistic activities. The only thing that stood between the union of Amedeo and Beatrice's trembling lips was a pair of expertly groomed whiskers, but those, I am sure, were more of a facilitator than an obstacle. But, we don't want to judge different times, different habits, and all that. But irreverent jokes aside, Amedeo and Beatrice fell deeply and sincerely in love. It wouldn't take long for Amedeo to propose. On the one hand, he would much love to speed up proceedings, but he would not marry her just yet. A recent law forbade promotions for unmarried officers. This was meant as an incentive for young men to marry and reproduce for the growth of the nation. Guillet was well aware of the law. He stated that his sense of honor prevented him from marrying Beatrice straight away. He knew that a promotion to first lieutenant would follow suit immediately, and it would look as though he was marrying her only for that reason. His plan B was to seek another war and earn a promotion on the battlefield, and then he would marry Beatrice, which seems like a totally rational way to plan a wedding. The occasion came with the start of the Civil War in Spain. Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany participated in that conflict by providing troops and equipment to the nationalist side led by Generalisimo Franco. And so, in the summer of 1937, Guillet volunteered to lead a detachment of Italian Arditi, or storm troops, into the country. I should specify at this point that Guillet was never a full supporter of fascism. All his military exploits were, and always would be, related to a sense of duty towards the king, Victor Emmanuel III, and the ruling House of Savoy. His involvement in the Spanish Civil War was born of personal considerations, although he later declared that he could not stand the idea of a communist Spain. And he soon got into the thick of the action. Assigned to an Italian division known as the Black Flames, he participated in the Battle of Santander in August of 1937. This was part of Franco's campaign to crush Republican resistance in the north. Guillet led his men to the assault on the stronghold of San Pedro. Despite stiff resistance, Amedeo succeeded in storming the Republicans, and this opened the doors to the advance on Santander. The next big battle was Teruel in the northwest. In this occasion, Guillet led a squadron of Moroccan cavalrymen. On an assault against a motorized column, he suffered serious shrapnel wounds, but he gritted his teeth and dispersed the enemy units, succeeding in capturing 3 Russian armored cars and their crews. After 8 months, he had earned his battlefield promotion and a military decoration from Franco himself, but he had also received a bad leg wound, meaning his Spanish adventure was over. While recovering in a military hospital in Tripoli, he reflected on the atrocities he had witnessed on both sides of the conflict. In particular, he was very vocal with his colleagues about the deplorable conduct of the Germans. At the end of 1938, Guillet had become good friends with a Libyan girl, a young medical student he had met at the hospital. She was looking forward to her graduation, but there was a problem. She was Jewish, and the recently approved racial laws in Italy demanded for her to leave university. These laws were a consequence of the increasingly tight bond between Rome and Berlin, as Italian fascism did not have an anti-Semitic component at its inception. Guillet appealed to the governor of Libya, Air Marshal Italo Balbo, but it was all in vain. That was another blow dealt to Guillet's shaky confidence in Mussolini's government. With growing disgust for the political development in Rome, Guillet asked for his next posting to be in Africa. Luckily for him, in 1939, a family acquaintance had been appointed as the new viceroy for the East African colonies. This was his namesake, Amedeo, Duke of Aosta, a cousin of the king. He had been appointed viceroy with the difficult task of pacifying Abyssinia after the conquest. Ethiopian guerrilla fighters loyal to Emperor Haile Selassie were still very active in 1939, and the Duke of Aosta thought men like Guillet were the answer. So our protagonist was given command of a unit called the Group of Amhara Bands, a multi-ethnic cavalry force which included Ethiopian, Eritrean, and Yemeni soldiers led by Italian officers. Guillet and the Amharas were given total autonomy and freedom of movement to eradicate guerrillas which had now spread into Eritrea. It was during one of those actions that the Amharas dubbed their leader the Devil Commander. After a long series of skirmishes with the guerrillas in the Dugar-Duba region, Guillet succeeded in luring them into a clash in open flat territory where he knew his horsemen would be at an advantage. Lieutenant Guillet led a charge against a group of enemies. The attack was successful, but his horse was shot from underneath him. Guillet immediately requested a second horse and charged again. Once more, another enemy formation was routed. Once more, the poor horse was shot down, but Guillet was unscathed. We like to think at this point that all the spare horses looked at each other, nodded, and decided to quietly leave the battlefield unnoticed. While they were doing that, Guillet seized control of a machine gun position, turned it towards the remaining rebels, and wiped them out single-handedly. As a result of this, Guillet's superiors awarded him the Silva Medal for Military Valor, the second highest decoration in the Italian army. Guillet's colonial troops instead bestowed on him the highest honor, the nickname of Devil Commander, indicative of his fiery fighting spirit and apparent immortality. In later life, when recounting this event, Guillet defined himself as such: the luckiest man I have ever known. In early 1940, Guillet made friends with an Ethiopian Muslim chieftain in his efforts to pacify Eritrea and northern Abyssinia. Generally, Muslim locals tended to side with the Italians, while Christians were staunch supporters of the Negus, the Ethiopian leader. Lieutenant Amedeo also became friends with the young, intelligent, and beautiful daughter of the chieftain, Kadia. When Guillet asked her what she wanted to do in life, she replied, "I am going to marry a chief and be at his side." But she had not yet chosen the chief. When Guillet left the village with his bands, he was surprised to see Kadia riding out to meet him. "I made my choice," she said. "You are the chief I want to be with." Guillet's initial resistance was futile, and Kadia soon became his lover. Amedeo's soul was understandably torn between the beautiful Ethiopian and Beatrice back home. When, on the 10th of June 1940, Mussolini declared war on France and the United Kingdom, the whole of Italian East Africa found itself isolated from the motherland. With little hope of seeing Beatrice again, Amedeo deepened his relationship with Kadia, who would follow him on the front lines on many occasions. The Duke of Aosta's war against the British and the French in East Africa had started well, with his troops occupying British Somaliland and border territories with Kenya and Sudan. However, total isolation meant a lack of supplies, including fuel for tanks and planes. Very soon, Aosta had to employ a defensive strategy, fortifying mountaintops to resist Allied advance as long as possible. One of these strongholds was Keru, which guarded the road to Asmara, the colonial capital of Eritrea. In January 1941, the Italian garrison at Keru desperately needed to buy some time against the advance of the Gazelle Force, an Anglo-Indian motorized and mechanized column. Desperate situations, they call for desperate measures, and desperate measures require men with courage, luck, and a moustache so stiff it could deflect shrapnel. On the morning of the 21st of January, the troops of the Gazelle Fighting Force were taking a break, brewing tea in the gorge of Keru. Suddenly, a shout broke the morning silence. "Savoia!" It was Guillet's battle cry. Dressed in Arab clothes and riding his favorite horse Sandor, the Devil Commander was leading a charge of 250 Eritrean horsemen. The charge cut through a Sikh regiment, flanked a column of armored cars, and then galloped straight towards the British artillery. Guillet and his men, they attacked the armored plates of the enemy with what they had: pistols, swords, and hand grenades. As these troops were Anglo-Indian, they described the grenades as flying like cricket balls. The defenders, taken completely by surprise, were cut down by swords and shrapnel. Guillet's squadrons rode through the column, regrouped, and then launched a second charge. But this time, the Gazelle troops were ready. They trained their guns and fired at point-blank range, cutting through the galloping horses, but also causing friendly fire damage as the shells exploded amid the Sikhs and their armored cars. After a few more seconds, the horsemen disappeared into the network of gorges of the Eritrean landscape. Guillet had dared the unthinkable, the cavalry charge against a mechanized column. Was it worth it? Well, the raiders' loss was great, perhaps half their men, but the damage they inflicted gave an important breather to their fellow troops at Keru. The charge at Keru would be the last cavalry charge faced by the British Army, with many soldiers declaring it the most frightening and extraordinary episode of the Second World War. Guillet knew that this was a war started for the wrong reasons and fought with inadequate resources. He continued the fight in two further battles, Kokon and Teclasen, until Asmara fell to Commonwealth troops on the 1st of April 1941. 2 days later, the now Captain Guillet made a harsh decision. He would disobey orders to surrender to the British and continue with a war of his own, a private war. With Kadia by his side, he gathered 100 of his best riders and organized them into an effective guerrilla fighting force. His aim was to pin down in Eritrea as many British troops as possible to prevent them from joining other theaters in Abyssinia, Egypt, and Libya. The Devil Commander disregarded his regular uniform, donned Arab clothes, and even changed his name to a new Yemeni identity, Ahmed Abdallah al-Redai. His embrace of Arab customs and asymmetric war against a powerful empire would earn him the nickname of the Italian Lawrence of Arabia after the war. Over the course of 8 months, Guillet and his guerrillas raided trains, convoys, and armories. They blew up roads, bridges, and galleries. They cut down telegraph and telephone lines, harassing British communication and logistics. 2 British intelligence officers were given the task to apprehend him, Major Max Harari and Captain Sigismund Reich. Harari would become a close friend of Guillet's after the war, but for the moment he was driven to get rid of this nuisance. He offered a reward of £1,000, dead or alive. But nobody was reporting him to the British authorities. Until one day, an Arab farmhand walked into the British headquarters in Asmara and gave precise directions as to where they could find the devil commander and his band. The man pocketed a reward and walked away, while Harari's men set off to finally seize the stubborn cavalryman. So you might be wondering, well, who was the farmhand? Well, that was none other than Guillet in disguise. He succeeded in sending Harari on a wild goose chase while raising more funds for his cause. But his luck, it could not go on forever. Action after action, the ranks of his band grew thinner. Even his faithful steed Sandor was captured by Harari's men. On one occasion, the farm where he was hiding was surrounded by the British. In his Yemeni disguise, he jumped from a window and simply walked away from the encirclement, ignoring the soldiers' calls to stop and identify himself. A quick-thinking Eritrean saved him by telling the British that the guy was a deaf Arab peasant and to leave him alone. With the band reduced to 30 men and a bad ankle wound, Guillet decided that he should not ask more sacrifices from his riders. He disbanded the private army, sent Khadija back to her father, and decided to retreat to Yemen with just one comrade by his side, Daifala. Guillet and Daifala traveled to the port of Massawa and paid a hefty sum to some smugglers to take them to Yemen. But the luckiest man in the world was in for a big surprise. The smugglers did not sail across the Red Sea, but instead dumped them on a desert shore some miles south of Massawa. The 2 adventurers, they were almost dead from thirst when some goatherds appeared in the distance. Surely they would help the luckiest man in the world and his friends, but they didn't. The goatherds attacked them, beat them senseless, stripped them of all their belongings, and left them for dead in the desert. Luck finally came knocking in the shape of a traveling merchant who picked up the 2 and sheltered them until they recovered. With the merchant's help, Guillet finally reached the Yemeni port of Hodeidah in December of 1941. When questioned, he revealed his identity and asked for refuge in Yemen. After a brief stint in prison, Guillet was summoned to the capital Sana'a, where he met the local ruler, Imam Yahya, who declared himself a friend of Italy. The Imam welcomed Guillet into his household, while the officer made himself useful by training Yahya's bodyguards and even treating an outbreak of cattle sickness. Luck was again back on his side, but well, what of the war? In mid-March 1943, news reached Guillet of British plans to repatriate Italian civilians and wounded servicemen from Eritrea with a Red Cross ship. The reward on his head, it was still standing, so he had to sneak on board and travel as a stowaway. In early September 1943, he was finally back in Rome. By now, a major, Guillet demanded men, weapons, and money to resume guerrilla actions in East Africa. But on the 8th of that month, news broke out that an armistice had been signed by King Victor Emmanuel III with the Allies. This armistice effectively split Italy in 2. To put it simply, fascist loyalists regrouped in the north and continued the fight alongside the Germans, while monarchists like Guillet and the anti-fascists formed a co-belligerent army in the south, siding with the Allies. Guillet was assigned to the intelligence services of the co-belligerents, performing several secret missions in Axis-controlled territory, of which little is really known. One thing is certain about this period of his life, and that's that he finally married Beatrice in September of 1944. Guillet's last action as a spy, it took place immediately after the end of the war in Italy on the 25th of April 1945. A brigade of resistance had stolen from fascist officials the imperial crown of Denegas Haile Selassie. Returning the crown to the Ethiopian ruler was a key to re-establishing a peaceful relationship with that country. Guillet staged a daring heist to retrieve the crown from the partisans and was then assigned to personally take it back to Ethiopia. He took the occasion to meet Khadija one last time. During this tearful reunion, he gave her a gift, not from him, but rather from his wife. Surprisingly, Beatrice knew everything about Khadija and was very understanding. She wanted Khadija to receive a family heirloom of hers, a beautiful bracelet, to thank her for taking care of Amedeo during his dangerous adventures. On the 2nd of June 1946, a referendum abolished the monarchy in Italy, which became a republic. Guillet decided he would rather not be an officer in a republican Italy and retired with the rank of colonel. His next career move would be to the diplomatic service. Due to his knowledge of Arabic, his postings would be mostly in Middle Eastern and Northern African countries, which gave him the occasion to meet again some of his old friends. For example, in the 1950s, he was working in the Italian embassy in Yemen, where he was reunited with Daifallah. He returned to Sana'a in September of 1962 to attend the funeral of the ruler Imam Ahmad. By coincidence, the same night, a coup was taking place against the new Imam al-Badir. Guillet woke up in his room to find al-Badir and his followers loading their weapons. As the conspirators approached, he helped them escape from the window of his room. As you can probably see, a diplomat's life is not just all about entertaining with pyramids of Ferrero Rocher. In 1967, Guillet was ambassador in Morocco. During an official party he was attending, a coup was launched against King Hassan. When a firefight broke out, Guillet, almost 60, sprang into action and managed to save several guests from the crossfire, including the German ambassador. The West German government awarded him the Grand Cross of the Order of Merit of the Republic. It is safe to say that the luckiest man in the world was by no means a lucky charm, neither to horses nor to Arab monarchs. The same retired official who spoke to us about Borghese some months ago also had the chance to meet Baron Guillet. He told us that while serving in Morocco, Guillet liked to take visiting dignitaries for a tour of the market of Rabat. To do so, he would disguise himself as a local and engage in intense shouting and haggling matches in Arabic with the vendors. On one occasion, Guillet and the vendor shouted so loud that it looked as though they might come to blows. Apparently, Guillet had insinuated that the vendor was the son of a dog and a lady of the night, to put it mildly. Then suddenly they burst out in laughter and embraced each other. In 1975, following his final appointment as Italian ambassador in Delhi, Amedeo Guillet and his wife retired to County Meath in Ireland. After the death of Beatrice in 1990, the former devil commander, he returned to Rome. In the year 2000, aged 91, Guillet traveled to Eritrea for the last time in order to visit the site of his adventure with his biographer Sebastian O'Kelly. He was received with full honors by the Eritrean government. Time moved on, and on the 16th of June 2010, aged 101, after a life of battles and charges and bullets and shrapnel and sword wounds, Amedeo Guillet finally raised the white flag and gave in to death. Some of our more faithful viewers may have noticed some similarities with another remarkable military leader we've covered before, Adrian Carton de Wyatt. Both Amedeo and Adrian, they were both soldiers. They were always looking for another war to fight in. They were cavalry officers. They suffered a great deal of wounds, but never gave up. They had a certain degree of madness. They sported enviable moustaches, they went from military to diplomatic duties, they retired in Ireland. Adrian was 29 years older than Amedeo and died 8 years before the Devil Commander moved to Ireland, so it's fair to say they never met. But what if, for a twist of fate, these two former enemies met in retirement and became friends? We're just left wondering what they might have got up to. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe. And when you're subscribing, hit that notification bell so you find out when we put out a new video. Also, why not check out my other channel called Geographics? It's sort of very much like this format, except it's about places and not people. I think you'll really like it if you enjoy this stuff, so please go check that out. And as always, thank you for watching.